A black woman was mopping the floor when her manager barked, "Move faster! This isn't charity." She stayed silent. What didn't he see? The woman eating alone near the window was the CEO. Within minutes, jobs were lost, power was flipped, and a message echoed through that kitchen. Respect isn't optional. This true story isn't just about injustice. It's about what happens when someone finally says, "Enough." They told her not to bring her daughter to work. She brought her anyway. Now, the little girl sat in the back hallway of a Texas diner, knees pulled to her chest, backpack clutched like a life vest, trying not to cry too loud. A manager shouted from the kitchen, berating her mother, cleaning lady, for being unprofessional, for having a child, for being poor. He didn't know the woman scrubbing floors had once dreamed of becoming a chef. He didn't care that she worked double shifts to pay rent in a trailer park outside El Paso. He didn't notice the quiet customer watching from the corner booth, the woman with tired eyes and calloused hands who'd once sat in that same hallway, just like the girl, waiting for her mother to finish mopping floors. That customer, she owned the place. And she was about to remind everyone what dignity looks like. They say memory fades with time. Mine never did. Not that one. I remember the sound of the mop bucket sloshing on cracked linoleum floors. I remember my mother's thin plastic gloves, always too loose around her wrists, filling with cold water as she scrubbed tile corners long after the customers had gone home. I remember sitting on an upside-down milk crate, legs swinging, waiting for her shift to end, the scent of bleach burning the back of my throat while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Other kids played Little League. I played with stray sugar packets from the diner tables. Other kids had shiny red bikes. By age 10, I had a pair of second-hand sneakers and a bus schedule memorized. Other kids complained about their parents being late for school pickup. I waited in back hallways, behind mop closets, counting the minutes between fry orders and floor buffing. My mother never complained. She just worked. She worked like her breath depended on it, like feeding me was the only thing that mattered, which to her, it was. But love, as pure as it was, couldn't buy what I saw in other kids' hands. It couldn't give me Saturday trips to the mall. It couldn't buy birthday cakes with candles instead of frosting. It couldn't give me the feeling of being normal. One day, I asked her if I could get a Barbie dream house. I didn't ask for much. Just once, I asked. She looked at me with those tired, kind eyes and said, "Mi amor, maybe one day." Then she went back to scrubbing the base of a toilet in a restaurant where no one knew her name. I never asked again. But I never forgot the feeling. That ache. That quiet vow I made to myself, somewhere deep where even sadness couldn't touch it. I didn't want to live like that. And more than that, I didn't want to see her live like that anymore. So I paid attention to everything. While the bus took me from our mobile home park to school, I studied the names on storefronts. While my mom cleaned dining booths, I watched how the managers spoke to people. They didn't look at her when they gave orders. When she wasn't looking, I took napkins and wrote down things I heard. Food prices, delivery times, phrases like net margin and table turnover. I didn't understand them yet, but I knew they mattered. I knew they were part of the language spoken by the people who owned things, not the ones who cleaned them. I carried that notebook with me for years. We couldn't afford a car, but I walked faster than most kids rode bikes. Not because I was in a hurry, but because I had somewhere to go. Somewhere beyond where we were. Somewhere my mother had never been allowed to imagine. She used to say to me, "You're not better than anyone, but don't let anyone make you feel smaller than you are." I didn't fully grasp what she meant until I got older and saw her standing quietly as someone half her age told her to mop faster. That moment stayed with me, not out of pity. My mother didn't inspire pity, but because it was the clearest picture I ever saw of Grace under pressure. She had every right to cry. She never did. She had every reason to give up. She never did. And so I couldn't either. Even as a child, I knew I wanted something different for me and her. I didn't want her to be invisible. I didn't want her daughter, me, to grow up apologizing for not having a birthday party or being the one kid who never had lunch money on Fridays. I didn't want to live in a world where women like her, immigrants, single mothers, night shift heroes, were only ever thanked in passing, if at all. That's why I worked. That's why I saved. That's why I built. Not for status, not to prove anything, but because I had a picture in my head. It wasn't a mansion or a yacht. For once, my mother was sitting at a table, not clearing it, and being served. Her hands were still, her back was straight, and her eyes were not searching the room to see who needed what. Just her, just peace, just deserved rest. So when people ask me why I care so much about how our staff are treated, why I walk into kitchens unannounced, why I insist on full health coverage for dishwashers and janitors, they think I'm soft. I'm not soft. I remember. I remember every minute my mother stood on her feet so I could have a better life. And I remember the promise I made sitting on that milk crate. No child should have to watch their mother be treated like she doesn't matter. Not if I can help it. Not in my business or a building that bears my name. That's why I still walk through the front door. Not because I forget who I am, but because I'll never forget where I come from. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't need to. The sound Isabel heard wasn't in the girl's throat. It was in her shoulders, in how they curled inward, trying to disappear. It was in her small hands, gripping a backpack that was too tight for a child to sit still. She was no older than 9, knees pulled up to her chest, sitting alone near the staff lockers, half hidden behind a mop bucket and a stack of paper towel boxes. Isabel had seen enough in her life to recognize that kind of silence. It was the kind that comes from holding too much, too young. She had been that girl. 38 years ago, sitting on a milk crate behind a kitchen just like this one, Isabel had learned how to hold her breath through sadness. Because there wasn't time to cry, her mother couldn't stop working. And no one had time to comfort a child whose mother was cleaning bathrooms in the back of someone else's dream. Isabel stood still for a moment, watching the girl. Then, without a word, she stepped around the counter and quietly went to the back hallway. The girl didn't hear her at first, too lost in whatever storm she was weathering. It wasn't until Isabel knelt beside her that she flinched. "I'm sorry," the girl whispered instinctively. Not hello. Not who are you. Just, "I'm sorry." Isabel shook her head gently. "You don't have to be," she said. "Not with me." The girl didn't respond right away, but she didn't move away either. That was enough. "I used to sit in a place like this," Isabel said, her voice low and even. "My mom worked in a kitchen. I waited in the back, just like you. I remember wanting to disappear too." The girl looked up just slightly. "My name's Isabel," she said softly. "What's yours?" "Lucia." "That's a beautiful name." Isabel smiled. "Do you like to draw, Lucia?" Lucia hesitated, then gave the slightest nod. "I used to draw on the back of old menus," Isabel said, chuckling a little. "Sometimes on napkins. My mom said I drew more buildings than people. I think I was trying to imagine places where she didn't have to mop the floors." Lucia didn't say anything. But Isabel saw how her fingers relaxed their grip on the backpack, just a little. Isabel didn't try to fix anything at that moment. She just sat with the girl long enough for the silence to feel less like a weight and more like a space that could be shared. Later that night, after the restaurant had closed and the floors had been swept and mopped by that same woman, Lucia's mother, Marta Isabel, pulled her aside in the hallway. "I saw your daughter earlier," Isabel said gently. Marta froze, eyes wide with panic. "She was just sitting quietly," Isabel added quickly. "She wasn't bothering anyone." "I'm sorry," Marta said immediately. "There was no one to watch her today. I told her to stay out of the way. It won't happen again." Isabel paused. "I don't want you to apologize," she said. "I want you to know. I understand. And I'd like to send something home with you. For her." 2 days later, Isabel returned, not with a press release or a camera crew, but with a small brown paper bag. Inside was a sketchbook, simple, soft-covered, with thick white pages. Beside it, a box of colored pencils, 24 in total, with shades Lucia might have never seen before: seafoam green, burnt sienna, pale lavender. She handed it to Marta before her shift. "She can draw anything she wants in here," Isabel said. "Dreams, diners, a world where the floor doesn't need scrubbing." Marta's eyes glistened. She took the bag carefully, as if it were breakable. "That's very kind," she whispered. Isabel placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Tell her. She's allowed to dream bigger." That night, Marta brought the bag home. Lucia opened it slowly, her eyes widening at the colors before her, like a sunrise she hadn't known she could hold in her hands. The next day, Isabel found a folded piece of paper taped discreetly to the office door. It was a drawing of a bright and tall restaurant, with her mother standing behind a counter, not mopping or carrying trays, but smiling and holding a plate of food. On the roof, written in bright block letters, "Lucia's Cafe." Isabel smiled quietly, folded the paper, and kept it. Because that's how healing begins, not with a speech, not with revenge, but with a soft voice, a shared memory, and the decision to see someone, truly see them, and give them something better to hold on to. The next morning, things were back to normal, or so they seemed. The breakfast rush was in full swing. The kitchen echoed with spatulas clanging against griddles, coffee pots dripping in rhythm, and orders being barked across the line. Marta moved quickly and silently, just as always. Her eyes were tired but focused, her hands steady. Lucia wasn't with her this time. She had left the sketchbook on the kitchen counter at home, next to a note she wrote in red pencil. "Mom, I'm okay today. Draw something good at work." But as Marta wiped down a counter near the dish station, the manager, Jared, strode in with a clipboard and a look of irritation on his face. "I need to speak with you," he snapped. Marta looked up, startled. "In private." She followed him into the back hallway. The door closed behind them with a sharp click. "I don't want to see your daughter here again," Jared began. "This isn't a charity. If you can't keep your personal life out of work, plenty of people can take your place." Marta opened her mouth, but no words came. She wasn't crying. She didn't plead. She just stood there, small, still, humiliated. Neither of them realized that Isabel was standing at the other end of the hallway, clipboard in hand, having come to drop off some updated training materials. She heard every word. And this time, she didn't wait. She walked straight in, calm but unmistakable. "Jared," she said, her voice low and precise. "Step into the office, now." He turned, surprised. "Isabel, I didn't—" "You did," she said, cutting him off. I heard you. Every word. Inside the office, Isabel closed the door gently. She looked at Jared with a gaze that didn't need volume to make its weight known. We don't speak to people like that, she said. Not here. Not anywhere. Marta's daughter wasn't disrupting anyone. And if you had taken even a second to notice, you'd have seen that Marta is one of our most dedicated employees. Jared scoffed. I'm just trying to maintain standards. No, Isabel said sharply. You're enforcing shame, and that's not a standard I recognize. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. You have two choices, she said. Learn to lead with empathy, or leave. Jared left. Not just the room, but the company. That afternoon, Isabel sat down with Marta, not in an office, at a booth, over a cup of coffee. I saw how you stood there and took it, she said. You don't have to do that anymore. Marta looked down, embarrassed. I didn't want to cause trouble, she whispered. You didn't, Isabel replied. You reminded me why I built this place. She paused. And Lucia? She reminded me who we're building it for. 15 years later, Lucia stood in a different kitchen. This one was hers. Her name, Lucia Rivera Delgado, was engraved in a brass plate beside the entrance of her first restaurant, Casa Lucia. The walls were painted warm yellow, which her mother used to say made a house feel like it was smiling. Inside, the scent of roasted poblano and handmade tortillas filled the air. There was laughter, music, and light. Lucia, now 24, tied her apron behind her back and adjusted the tiny gold locket that hung from her neck. Inside it, a folded drawing from that sketchbook Isabel once gave her, a picture of a diner with the words Lucia's Cafe in red crayon. She never forgot. She attended culinary school on a scholarship funded by La Niña Fuerte, a program Isabel had started for the children of service workers. She worked the line in 3 different cities, learned to braise like her grandmother, and plate like a Paris-trained chef. But through it all, she never forgot why she started. Not to impress, but to feed. Not to perform, but to honor. On opening night, Marta stood in the front row of guests. Her eyes welled up as Lucia took the microphone. I used to draw my dreams on napkins, Lucia said, her voice steady. And I thought maybe they'd come true if I drew hard enough. They did, but not because I drew harder. Because someone saw me when I felt invisible. Because someone told my mother she mattered. And because my mother showed me what strength looks like. She paused. I built this place for her, and for the little girl I used to be. The crowd stood to their feet. Marta wiped her eyes. Isabel, now older, sat quietly at the back of the room and smiled. She didn't need to speak. Years ago, she'd said everything she needed to with a sketchbook and a quiet act of kindness. Lucia looked up and saw her. And in that moment, it wasn't just the dream that came true. It was the promise fulfilled. Would you remember her name? Not the one who opened the restaurant, the one who scrubbed its floors. Would you remember the little girl who once cried quietly by the mop sink, before she learned how to turn grief into art, silence into flavor? Most people don't. They remember the food, the lights, and the Instagram photos, but not the people who held the place together when it was just steam, sweat, and long shifts. Isabel Rivera remembered. That's why she built the scholarship. That's why she kept a worn-out drawing in her wallet. That's why she returned to the booths she once hid under. Not to boast, but to listen. She believed some stories deserve to be remembered, not for drama or pity, but because they carry truths people try too hard to forget. She understood something most executives never do. The future doesn't start in boardrooms. It begins in the break rooms. It starts in backpacks. It starts with quiet girls named Lucia, with tired hands that keep showing up. And Lucia understood something too. The night Casa Lucia was featured in a national magazine, she didn't pop the champagne. She made mole by hand, the way her grandmother taught her, grinding spices slowly with a stone she brought from home. Her team thought it strange, a bit ceremonial. They didn't realize it was an act of gratitude, a kind of prayer. That same night, she sat down and wrote a letter, not to investors or the press, but to her mother. It read, "You gave me more than food. You gave me dignity. When they looked through you, you looked at me. When they talked down to you, you lifted me up. Every plate I serve in your name." She framed it behind the kitchen, so every young woman who walked in to clock a shift would know there is no shame in being unseen, only by staying that way. Lucia began hiring girls like her. First, generation college students, teen moms, kids from trailer parks, and daughters of women who kept bleach under the sink and dreams in a tin can above the fridge. When those girls showed up with sketchbooks, notebooks, or bus passes in hand, she didn't roll her eyes. She fed them, trained them, paid them more than the law required, gave them paid breaks, and allowed them to bring their kids when school was closed. And every year, on her restaurant's anniversary, she closed early, not for profit, for the purpose. She and her team would pack meals and deliver them to motels and shelters, the places she and her mom once lived in between paychecks, not to be seen, but to remind those still struggling, "You're not forgotten, you're not broken, you're next." Isabel never asked for applause. She never needed it. But one evening, long after retirement, she returned to Casa Lucia quietly and sat in the last booth near the window. She watched her legacy move in rhythm, pots clanging, orders called, laughter rising. She watched Lucia train a new girl on how to plate with pride, not just precision. And as she stood to leave, Lucia caught her at the door. "Stay a moment longer," she said with a soft smile. Lucia brought out one final plate, not on the menu. It was Isabel's favorite, her mother's caldo recipe, rich, humble, healing. No one said anything as she took the first bite, but in that silence, something spoke louder than words. This is what becomes of kindness when it's planted deep. It grows, it cooks, it leads, it lives on. Years later, former Casa Lucia employees would open their restaurants. They followed the same policies and values. One called her restaurant La Segunda Oportunidad. Another called her Mama. And in every one of them, somewhere on a wall, a sentence was framed. "You're not just staff, you're the soul of this place." Because this wasn't just a story. It was a seed, planted in silence, watered with work, fed by memory, grown with love. And that's how legacy works. Not by building things for yourself, but by creating things that outlive you and still know your name. Lucia could have franchised years earlier. The awards were there. The investors were knocking. Articles called her the immigrant's granddaughter who rewrote fine dining. But Lucia didn't want fine dining. She wanted dignity served hot, with flour-dusted aprons and hands that remembered what it meant to need a second chance. So, when she opened her second location, she didn't look for trend reports or glossy real estate listings. She looked for neighborhoods no one believed in. The new restaurant was located in a part of town that others often skipped past. Empty lots, broken benches, and families sharing motel rooms. But Lucia saw kitchens waiting to happen, potential in boarded-up windows, and stories waiting to be rewritten. And she hired accordingly. not with resumes, but with open doors. She put up a handwritten sign in front of the construction site. No ID, no degree, no address. Come talk to me anyway. Lucia, head chef. At first, people thought it was a marketing stunt. It wasn't. She sat across from a man named Jerome, who hadn't had a mailing address in 4 years. She hired him to manage dry storage. She met a woman named Tasha, who used to cook for her siblings over campfires in an abandoned trailer park. Tasha became the lead prep cook. She trained young men who used to sleep in bus stops to run tables with poise and empathy. She taught them how to fold napkins and greet every guest like they were returning home. But it wasn't charity. It was a belief. Lucia didn't just give jobs. She provided fitting uniforms, badges that said, "Welcome," and shifts that included breaks and warm meals. She created a culture where service wasn't servitude. It was connection. Her restaurants didn't run on speed. They ran on soft power, the kind you feel when someone remembers your name, allergies, or favorite table. She often told her team, "The food brings them in, but the way you make them feel, that's what makes them stay." Each new location had a wall of first chances, photos of team members who had once been homeless, undocumented, addicted, or ignored. Under every frame was a small note, written by hand. Someone believed in me. Now I believe in others. And it wasn't just the staff. Lucia reimagined how guests were treated as well. No tipping was allowed. All employees were paid fairly. Customers could ask for the gratitude meal, a no questions asked, no charge plate served with dignity, not pity. The idea came from something Isabel once told her. When we feed someone, we don't just nourish the body. We remind them they still matter. Within 5 years, Casa Lucia grew into 6 locations. Every one of them served the same slow-made mole, the same broth from her grandmother's recipe, the same policy, people first, always. She didn't open restaurants to grow profits. She opened them to develop people. And when reporters asked her how she maintained such a warm, loyal staff, she always smiled. Because they know I see them. I don't manage workers. I raise leaders. In every kitchen, she kept a chair, an empty one, by the back wall. When asked, she'd say, "That's for someone who hasn't arrived yet, someone the world gave up on, but who still deserves a place at this table." And week after week, someone always filled that chair. Because broken people don't stay broken, not when they're fed with care, and not when they're led with respect. Lucia didn't just cook. She created space. She didn't just serve meals. She served dignity on every plate, in every shift, with every soul the world tried to forget. And the chain grew, not because of trends, but because kindness scales when it's real. She would later say in a keynote to new staff, "This isn't fast food. This isn't luxury dining. This is human hospitality, where the door stays open, even when life has slammed every other one shut." And when someone asked why she hired people with no homes, no shoes, no experience, she answered, "Because I had a pencil and a blank page once, and someone gave me a chance to dream." They didn't do it for applause. Isabel didn't step in to be praised. Lucia didn't build her restaurant chain for headlines or awards. They did it because looking away was never an option. Because silence is its form of betrayal. In a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, their actions reminded us of something ancient, something urgent, that every human being deserves to be seen, respected, and given a chance to rise. This story wasn't just about a crying girl or a tired mother. It wasn't just about kitchens or sketchbooks. It was about the invisible becoming visible, about ordinary courage showing up in unexpected places, with a hand, a word, a decision that says, "You are not alone. I've been where you are, and I will not let this be your end." Kindness, when lived with conviction, isn't soft. It disrupts. It transforms. It flips power on its head and turns small acts into legacies that span generations. Lucia's restaurants weren't just places to eat. They became sanctuaries. Not perfect, not polished, but real. People who had once been discarded were given aprons, purpose, and the dignity of doing work that mattered. And isn't that the world we ache for? A world where leadership means listening, where service means empowerment, where success is measured not just in numbers, but in the number of lives made whole again. If this story has touched you, let it move through you. Please share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. Please pass it on to someone who's lost faith in second chances. And if you feel that quiet tug in your chest right now, the one that says, "This matters," then follow it. Subscribe to this channel. Join our community. Here, we don't just tell stories. We build bridges between pain and hope, between strangers and a sense of belonging. Leave us a comment. Let us know which moment stayed with you. Or type one word, "Seen." That's more than enough. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and for listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart.